This session will be recorded. If you want to use it, if you're doing some professional development, you might pull some pieces from it. Or if you have colleagues that want to see it. We have several people who registered but weren't able to be here in person. So we want them to have the opportunity to watch it that way too. Thank you for joining us for another hands-on interactive workshop designed to support introducing computer science to out-of-school time programs. And we know a lot of after-school programs, museums, and libraries are adding computer science to what they offer to young people. So this is an opportunity to build your skills around facilitating this sort of experience and to learn about resources from Click to Computer Science that you can use in training your team if you need that. We're going to be thinking about what computational thinking means and how we are already computational thinkers in our everyday lives, and how the practices of computational thinking can really be important to young people too, to help them develop their identity as someone who can do this and prepare them for a future where computers are going to be integrated, well, where computers are already integrated into everything that they're doing and experiencing in the world. As I said earlier, this is a hands-on workshop. If you have some paper, a pen and crayons or markers handy, that will be good. We're going to be looking at an activity on computational thinking from code.org, and there is a link in the chat to download that handout. If you joined us late and you didn't see the link, let us know and we'll repost that in the chat. My name is Sandra Frerichs. I am part of the Click to Computer Science team and also a STEM specialist at University of Nebraska 4-H. And I'm glad to have you here. My preferred pronouns are she, her, and I am joining you from Lincoln, Nebraska. I invite you to introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to know where you're joining us from. Preferred pronouns are really helpful because sometimes we don't know how you want to be referred to. So we appreciate you sharing that. And any questions or comments you have about computer science that you want to share, you're welcome to put those in the chat as well. I'm joined today by Ann O'Connor. Ann, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Ann O'Connor, and I am the project manager for the Click to Computer Science website. And my background is science education, and I've done some engineering.
Yeah, I will say neither of us are computer scientists. That's not our area, but we're science educators. And we will help you see how you are using this and how you can use it in your everyday life. There we go. And this is your slide.
All right. So the first thing that we wanted to, do you want to put the slides up? You don't have them up yet.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, that'll be helpful.
And so our agenda for today is on the left, and then the goals that we have are on the right. And I'll just give you a moment to look at that. The hands-on activity is learning to play a game with no instructions. And so the first thing we're going to do is start out with an unplugged computer science experience that Sandra is going to lead us in.
Let's see if I can do this. My plan was to do this in the whiteboard, but I think I'm going to try doing it in the chat because I am just a little bit more comfortable using the chat. So we're going to try that. The challenge is to find the sum of numbers from 1 to 200. So 1 plus 1 is 2, plus, or 1 plus 2 is 3, plus 4 is 7. That's how we're doing it. So can you think about that in your head? How do you sum up all the numbers from 1 to 200? Has anybody got the answer yet? Have you figured it out? We're using this to introduce the idea of computational thinking because that's a computation and it is hard to do in your head. You have the right answer, Andrew. You use multiplication instead of summing, right? You want to explain how you found the answer? Andrew, you want to unmute and explain your process?
Sure. So I started by, if you take the highest number plus the lowest number, 200 plus 1, you get 201. And then you can use like kind of two numbers, you start kind of iterating inward. So 2 plus 199, 3 plus 198. Each pair of numbers is going to continue to equal 201. You're going to end up with 100 pairs of numbers, starting from 1 and plus 200 to 100 plus 101. So you end up with 100 pairs of numbers that all equal 201. And then that's where I got 201 times 100.
Wonderful. So did you think about that as computational thinking when you were thinking through the problem? Did you think about it using computational thinking?
Not necessarily. I'm generally pretty good with numbers and just kind of knew what I needed to do.
So the computational thinking strategy that you use, we call breaking it down. You're taking, well, there's also finding patterns. So you found a pattern and you were able to use that pattern to break the problem down. Because the example I gave you is if you start with 1 plus 2 plus 3, that's the very inefficient way to solve the problem. But by finding the pattern of sums of 201 and counting how many there are, you were able to come up with that answer really quickly, faster than I could even think about it as I was facilitating. And that's exactly what we want to introduce with computational thinking. We use computational thinking to solve problems that are hard to solve on our own. And this is an example. The activity actually takes you through facilitating it very carefully. It's much easier to do if you have a whiteboard, but I'm not real comfortable using the whiteboard in Zoom. But you can walk a group of elementary age kids through this problem and they'll be overwhelmed probably at first, but it's something that the level of thinking is something they can wrap their heads around as you're walking them through it. And that leads us to the thinking about the computational thinking practices, which is what we wanted to use this activity to help us start thinking about these practices. So the practices are decompose, which we use that one to break the problem down into smaller pieces. Pattern matching, thinking about similarities, differences, patterns in the problem or in the data that you're looking at. Abstraction, we actually did a little bit of that too. How do you pull out the specific differences that are going to help you come up with a bigger scale solution? And that was when we realized that it's the numbers that sum up to 201. That's the pattern we want to latch on to to solve the problem. And then we got away from thinking about the sum of numbers from 1 to 200, because then the problem is how many sums are there that add up to 201, and that gets us to the solution. And then the algorithm is the formula that becomes the answer to your solution. So I can put that in the chat too. This is how we write that algorithm in the activity. The sum of the numbers between 1 and, well, this is 2000. Taking it up to another level is 2000, or in our case, 200 times how many of those sums are there. And that's where we get the answer. Does that make sense? Maybe I'll put this formula in the generic form. That may be a little bit easier to follow. So I think we may think about some of these problems related to math, putting together an algorithm or a formula, decomposing the problem, breaking it down into steps. But we're going to think about how these are strategies that we can use in a lot of different ways, not just to solve a challenge like this. Yes. Yes. In the chat. Saba Niam, that is correct. That's how we get the divided by 2, not multiplying by 2. Okay. So this is the first activity to introduce the game with no instructions, and I'm gonna let you tell them a little bit more about that activity.
All right, so now we're going to actually play a game with no instructions, which is from code.org, is where you need the handout that Sandra sent the link for, and you can just open that up and look at that. And I'll give you a few minutes to read through that in a little bit. And it would be helpful to have crayons or markers. And so does anybody need to go and get supplies quick? If not, Sandra is going to set up breakout rooms of 3 people. And in just a few minutes, we'll put you into the breakout rooms so that you can read the scripts and the handouts that with the link. And then you can get an idea of how others have played the game, and then think about how you can use the computational thinking practices to figure out how the game works. So we're asking you to try and figure out how to play the game with no rules by those scripts. And you'll have 7 minutes to figure out how to play the game with no instructions, figure out how it works, and then if you have time to play a couple of rounds. And if you need help, just click the Ask for Help button in the meeting controls and invite host. And if you finish early, you can return to the main session and we'll just move on if everybody is back early. And that helps us to know when you're ready to move on. And after 6 minutes, we'll give you a 60-second countdown that will close the rooms. Are you ready, Sandra?
Well, I want to make sure that everybody had time to find the activity. So I gave you a link earlier to the handout. The link in the chat right now takes you to the activity on code.org. Can you give us a thumbs up to let us know that you have gotten to the activity, that you found the activity we're going to ask you to try to do? Okay. I'm going to break us up into 4 breakout rooms, but no, think I'm going to have to move somebody. And so that puts us, automatically divides us up between the breakout rooms. And we need you to play the game in order for it to work for everybody to have enough partners. Is that okay?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay. Now, I will say, oftentimes when we open breakout rooms, we have people leave. If you're going to leave, let me know now, because I'll have to make smaller breakout rooms. So I don't want to leave any of the breakout rooms hanging. We're relying on you to do this activity with the other people in your breakout rooms. All right. Here we go. You should be able to join your breakout room now. And I will stay here for a minute, and you can let me know if you have any problems getting into your breakout rooms. Kayla, are you able to join your breakout room?
You're also welcome to type in chat if you want to. I can share from our breakout room. We just read the instructions and then I think followed and figured out, well, there's an animal in every one of them. So there apparently is a need to have an animal selected. And then there's 3 numbers. So apparently you need to roll dice 3 times. And so I think that's kind of how we figured it out. And then we also figured out from the instructions on page 2 that there are something assigned to each of those numbers. So when you roll the first time, colors are assigned. When you roll the second time, random items, as far as we could tell, were assigned. And then when you roll the third time, there was a location on the animal that was assigned each of those numbers. So that's kind of how we figured it out.
Was the same for everybody else? Casey said it reminds me of constructing if statements. Think about how to write that. I was actually trained as an English teacher, and so it reminds me of learning the parts of a sentence and some of the activities that we did there. Here's an example of what it looks like when you've gone through and identified what are the things that are the same, what are the things that are different. And that information then is what you use to put together the algorithm. And let's do a quick test. So if this is what I drew, and that is a red bow on the donkey's
Back, I
back,
believe.
I believe.
Yep.
What does that mean? What does that tell you about what the dice rolls would have been? Can you reverse engineer what the person playing the game rolled?
And page 2 will help you out. Yep, Andrew's correct. It's 1, 6, and 6. And then the person selected the donkey, which was their choice.
So what about the dice roll there? If the roll is 3, 4, 6, what is that going to generate?
Andrew's correct again. That's right. It would be a yellow cupcake on the back of whatever animal that they selected.
So we wanted to spend enough time with this activity so that you could take it. You've got the link. You can download it now. This is something you could run with the students in your program. It is a good way to introduce what is computational thinking. And I think, Anne, this is still your side if you want to explain how we use computational thinking in this activity.
Yes. So decompose, as it says, describes breaking down a problem into smaller pieces. And so for the kids, having a game that they're trying to figure out how to play with no instructions is a big problem. And so helping them to figure out how to break that down is decomposing. And so we did that by having kids underline the words that are different, that changed between players, and then circling the words that stayed the same. And then they can start to figure out, oh, okay, there's something that's the same all the time. And so maybe I just need to plug in these things that change somehow. And so that gets you into pattern matching, which is describing similarities or patterns between things. So once they started figuring out that they had words that were the same, they started figuring out, okay, there's a pattern to this. And so now I always have an animal, that's a part of the pattern. And then I always had some numbers that I had to attach with it by rolling dice. And so then you move into abstraction, which is the thinking practice of pulling out specific differences to make one solution work for multiple problems. And so when they were doing this game without instructions, they were doing that by figuring out, okay, what was the same all the time, and then what was different. And what they figured out was the same, like they always choose an animal, they always rolled dice 3 times. Then they could start to develop their algorithm, which is just a list of steps that you follow to finish a task. And so once they figured out their algorithm for this game, then they could all play it and they could be consistent at how they played it so that it was fair for everyone. And so that's how we use the computational thinking practices in this activity. Now, did you want to say something, Sandra?
Well, I was thinking actually before we do the flash chat, maybe I would share the first video so they could see a group of kids doing the activity, and then let's come back to the flash chat. Is that okay?
Yep, that's fine.
Okay, this is a video from Click to Computer Science, and it will show you a group of kids that are going through this activity. And some things you'll notice in the video is this is a group of English language learners. And so Dagan, the facilitator, has adapted the activity specifically for the audience that he's working with. He's doing it a little bit differently than just reading through the activity. And certainly it plays out a little bit different than it does with us as adult learners. But I think the overview video here will help you sort of envision what this looks like with a group of students.
Okay.
The objective of the game without rules is to provide the youth an opportunity to intentionally take all 4 parts of computational thinking and apply them and get to that end goal so they can see it all together as a method. We start with decompose, so we break down the problem. And then we look at any types of patterns. Another step is abstraction, so that's taking out all of those differences and really taking a look at what might be able to be applied in different ways. And then finally we're looking at creating algorithm. And so we're creating that algorithm, that list of steps to solve that problem. We started with an activity that was very challenging and nearly impossible in a very purposeful way.
So are you ready for a really big challenge? Yeah! All right. So you can't use paper and you can't use pencil for this challenge. You have to just use your brain. All right? Sum all of the numbers between 1 and 200 in your head. You have 30 seconds. Are you ready? Ready? All right. Think about it. Go.
And so the point of doing that is to set up that things are challenging and we need tools in order to solve them. So after the kickoff activity to get them to start seeing this, we started getting into a game that had no rules, with no instructions.
Sometimes when we are on the computer, we don't have instructions and we need to figure out what's going on. That's what we're doing. So the first part, the suggestion is to circle the sections of words that are identical from player to player.
I facilitated kind of a back and forth between the students in order to get them to start seeing that they can break down the problem.
Yeah, so first, let's see if we can find any patterns. So if we read that first sentence, take a look at that first sentence. I choose. Yeah, I choose, I choose. Is there anything else here? What's the same in these 2 sentences? What can I circle just like on your activity?
I have 3 orange cats and I have 2 orange fish.
Awesome. So our next step is underline the words that change from player to player. So out of these sentences, what's different?
2 and 3, fish and cat.
Okay, 2 and 3, and fish and cat. And then third, on this bottom part, you're going to write a script. What would a computer do in order to play this game?
So they completed that game using computational thinking and all 4 areas. At the end of that lesson, they had to write that script, that algorithm, in order to have someone else play the game with them.
We have to choose an animal first.
All right, first step, choose an animal. In my algorithm, that's what would go first, right? Choose an animal. Then what do I do?
And then you roll a dice once to know what color.
Okay.
Know a color, and then you roll again, and then you get a 6. You have to get, if you got a 2, you have to get a blue bow.
I'm going to see if I can decompose. I'm going to break it apart. There is a yellow cupcake on a tiger's tail. So that means a 2 was rolled, a 4 was rolled, and a 3 was rolled. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah? Awesome. So I can tell, I can go backwards and forwards based on what you did. You guys are awesome.
So at the end of the activity, they had the instructions that didn't exist before.
All right. So now you've gotten to see how kids played it and had a little bit of an explanation. We wanted to ask you just a couple of questions that we would like you to respond to in the chat, and I'll give you just a couple of minutes for each question. And you can share your own ideas, or you can comment on something that someone else has shared. And so the first question we have for you is, what strategies have you learned today that can help you when you have a problem that is too hard? And what can you do? And Sandra just put the question in the chat too, so that you can refer back to it. And you can just write whatever you wish and then put it in the chat. And as soon as we're done, we'll move on to the next question. All right, and I'll give you just a moment. I see some thumbs up going with different comments. I'll give you just a minute to read the other the comments, and so you can respond to those if you wish. Like the thumbs up.
I'm sorry, what's the other question?
And the other question is, after you've thought about the first one, is what can you do? And you can either think about this in the context of what can you do with kids, or you can think about it in the context of yourself. What can you do about these different ideas that you came up with for strategies? All right. I like all the comments, and the ideas that you had about strategies were really good. I especially liked the getting warmed up and putting yourself into that mindset, because it takes a little time to go from one type of subject to a different one, especially for kids. So I like that transition. So the next question we have for you to think about, and we'll just do the same thing again, is after this experience, what will you do first when asked to do something which you don't know how to do? And so you can, again, think about this in your own context, or you can think about it in the context of kids and how you might help them as well. And Sandra also put this question in the chat as well. All right. And there's kind of some themes that emerged from what you were all saying. And I'll give you just a few seconds here to respond to each other if you wish. And then I'll summarize this and we'll move on to the next activity. All right. As I was reading through everything, it's kind of two themes emerged. Several people said they would decompose, try and figure out their problem, break it down into smaller pieces or more achievable pieces. And kind of the second thing that I noticed people were saying was doing patterns, figuring out what was similar, what was different in their previous experiences, and how do they use those to help them now solve this problem that looks really hard. And I think those are both strategies that you might start with in working with a problem. Computational thinking isn't necessarily linear where you have to do a decomposition first. Sometimes you can look for patterns and do decomposition second. It kind of depends on what kind of problem you're being asked to solve. So I think that is something interesting that emerged from your question or your answers to that question. So then the next thing we wanted to do was just think about how do you now engage youth in computational thinking? And so thinking for a moment about the following questions, you don't need to type them in chat, but what would you expect to happen if you led this activity with youth at your program? And then what would you want them to get out of it? And then the final question, just think about for a moment is, would they think of themselves as computational thinkers by the end of this activity?
I would actually love to have people unmute and share or share in the chat because I'd like to hear, and we have, we're okay on time, so we have a little bit of time to really dive into this. What would you expect to happen with this activity? What would it feel like with the kids that you work with or that you are familiar with? It was helpful for me to see the video because just reading the activity, it sounds like it wouldn't be that engaging, but it seemed like the kids in the video were pretty engaged. They're having more fun than I thought they would. Is this an activity that you would do in your program, or is this one that you'd pass on? I like that comment, Kayla. The comment that Imadi, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, but the comment that Imadi makes about how can we make it culturally relevant to the students and help them see themselves as computational thinkers is really the piece we want to dive into next. So I want to think about that. And I like the feedback that I'm seeing in the chat. Emily has one about, we wanted to have them do some writing, and this would be a good experience for them to practice those skills too. That sort of imperative is the word you use when you're, is that what it means when you're trying to give instructions? That's a different style of writing than maybe conversational writing.
Those were interesting comments. And so the next thing we wanted to talk about before we watch another video is when we do computer science in 4-H, it isn't just about the content, it's also about an opportunity to support positive youth development, which is something that we really focus on in 4-H. And computer science activities can help youth develop a sense of confidence and competence. And computational thinking builds problem solving and critical thinking. So we already talked about we already looked at the first video, which was an overview of the game without instructions. And so now we want to watch a video that focuses on how Dagan, who facilitates this activity, actually does it. And so as you watch the video, notice the positive and negative emotions that youth experience. Are they learning to manage their emotions? And notice how Dagan adapts the activity to support youth in seeing themselves as a computational thinker. So we'll watch the video and then we can discuss that a little bit, and I'll have a few questions for you.
You're a computational thinker.
You're a computational thinker.
Awesome.
To form STEM identity, the youth need to be able to form that opinion of themselves, and they need to internalize it. So how does that happen? So one is awareness. So knowing that these things are out there is definitely helps form identity as a kind of a passive, that thing exists, thus I could pursue it at some time. But to go beyond that, we also have to have some of that identity formed within the students.
Once I became a partner with Jay here, I'm going to pick one of those words and I'm going to say decompose, break a problem into smaller pieces. I'm going to say a definition, and then Jay's going to choose one. So just choose any one of those four, and you're going to do it over and over and over. Okay, which one?
I'll do it.
And what's the definition?
Steps that you can follow to finish a task.
Boom. All right, so we've both said a definition. We're going to say, you are a computational thinker. Say it to me. And then I go find another partner. Right? So then I
Today during this lesson, I happen to have the students orally say, I am, and then whatever that identity is around, and multiple times, in multiple ways, in multiple contexts. So with a success, I wanted them to say, I am a computational thinker. So what do I do first? I need to choose a animal. So this is that algorithm. Okay, so I'm going to choose puppy.
right, what do I do next?
Roll again.
Oh, okay. And then I write it down. I'm figuring out the pattern here. Yeah.
And you gotta go again.
And again, okay.
That's one. Then you
And
got
a 2.
two. Then you got one, so you're gonna put a cell
Thank you.
phone. Then,
Cell phone,
Then
okay.
you got a 2 again, so you're gonna put a cell phone, a blue cell phone in his tail.
On the horse's tail, was there an example? Okay, that's what the cell phone needs to look like. Blue cell phone on the puppy's tail. Yeah?
Yeah.
So you just gave me a set of instructions. Do you remember what that word's called? Algorithm. So you gave me an algorithm to solve this problem, right? To follow these instructions. You guys are great computational thinkers. Can you all look at each other and be like, I'm a computational thinker, right? Like you're fixing your hair? Yeah. So reinforcement of that helps them internalize that as a way for them to begin to solve problems.
Then a blank, and then a blank.
Nailed it.
That means
Yeah.
I need to draw a blank on my blank thing.
You nailed it. You're a computer scientist. That's
Even if they don't become a computer scientist, being able to be a multifaceted person, be able to have multiple skills, this would remain with them that they become a problem solver. It's a transferable skill, and having them feel that inside them by saying it, I think is super powerful.
All right. So the first question I have for you is, how does Dagan adapt the activity to support youth in seeing themselves as computational thinkers? And do you think he was successful at that or not? And you can unmute or you can type in the chat, either one. And I'll give you a couple minutes to think about this.
So he has them say out loud, I'm a computational thinker. And then he uses repetition so that they repeat it. And I think it builds confidence. But one of the things that I observed is that he also has a good rapport with the students. So they feel comfortable with him. I'm observing in their interactions. So I was thinking about, as a facilitator, trying to teach youth computational thinking, it might be good to build up that rapport so that you can have engagement, and so that like students participate the way that we see in the video.
Yeah, I think that is a great observation. And I will just give you a little background on this video. This was a group of students that he went out and taught. He had never met before that day. And so this was a one-day event that they did with this school that was a school for Spanish-speaking students that were learning English. And so he came in and he had just one day to establish that rapport and to develop that relationship with those kids. And so I thought that was really interesting because it comes through in the video that he has established a little bit of a rapport with them at least, but he didn't have a long time to do it. And so, some of that is just maybe skill and talent of a facilitator and experience. He had over 10 years of experience, but you can establish rapport with students and build that trust if you come in and you know how to do it. And so I think that's maybe a little helpful background for that. Anything else that anybody else had observed about this, or how he adapted the lesson and changed it from what you read when you were looking at it earlier? Yeah, the hair flipping was funny, and the kids liked it. You could tell that they were getting into it and they were interested in it. And he did directly engage with them. I noticed, I've watched this video several times now, he maintains eye contact with them. He looks at him, he gives them high fives. And so there is a lot of interaction with the students. He uses repetition. Andrew mentioned that. That is definitely something that he did, and he did that, as he said in his interview, with purpose, so that they could do it in different contexts and in different ways. And so that's definitely something that the more you say something, the more that you tend to believe it if you just start repeating it. And so saying I'm a computational thinker, it may not get them to the point where they really think that, but the more they say it, the more it's processing. So I think that's also a good observation. So my second question then is, what did he add that wasn't part of the activity when we did it? And some of this you've already touched on. He added several things with your computational thinker and the interactions with the students that wasn't directly in the lesson plans. But is there anything else that you can think of that he added that wasn't in the activity that you looked at earlier? All right. It doesn't look like anybody has anything to add on that. The only thing that I will say that I noticed that he did, beyond what we've already discussed, is the fact that he had them go around the room explaining the vocabulary to each other. So they were picking a word, and then they were saying the definition of that word, and then saying, I'm a computational thinker, and then going to another person. That isn't actually in the activity. And that's a really interesting way to build vocabulary. And considering that these students were all English as second language learners, that's an interesting technique because it helped them to reinforce that vocabulary, because those words are pretty hard for a non-English speaker. They're even hard for some English speakers. So I think that was a good way to reinforce that as well. And so I have a couple other questions and then we will move on. One of the things that people, whenever they're learning something new, you always have emotions to deal with. And so what positive and negative emotions did you see in the video? And did you feel like the kids were learning to manage those? Or did you think that they were just not addressed?
I really saw, especially at the beginning, the activity where they're summing the integers from 1 to 200. There was some stress. There were some, I would say, negative emotions around that activity, and it was, that activity is designed to kind of to foster that, to make people feel a little bit stressed or uncomfortable with the tasks that they've been given. So I definitely saw that there was some of that happening, but I don't think that, and I think maybe it's partly because of how quickly he moved through the steps. He didn't leave them in that stressed point for very long. He moved, took them through step by step so that they were following along. So I think that it was a way to help learn a management strategy, that a problem can be overwhelming, but when you are able to break it down, then that is a way to manage those emotions. So I think he did a good job with that, at least at that first part. I don't know if other people saw that differently. I don't think we always think about emotions as part of STEM activities, but they often are, and they're all so closely associated with behavior issues too, that if you have youth that are feeling strong emotions, they're more likely to have behavior problems. So thinking about emotions when you're planning an activity is probably worth doing.
All right. And so the last question for you to just think about is, how would you adapt this activity to meet the needs of the young people that you work with? And so just thinking about this in your context, you've seen in one example of how this activity was taught to kids. How would you do this for your students or your youth?
Is it too basic for the kids you're working with? It sounds like some of you are already doing computer science. Maybe this is kind of behind where your kids are right now. Imani, would this work with the youth in your program?
Yes, I think so. I was still thinking about how to like how to make it culturally relevant. Um, our target group is girls of color that have been historically marginalized in STEM fields and careers. So we think about how to incorporate identity and things of that nature into our curriculum. So I was still thinking about, and then also what we had thought about, like doing icebreakers at the beginning um, of our programming. And so this training made us think about using the activities that we learned about here to actually maybe be those icebreakers or for them to work on before we get into the program.
Yeah. I really agree with you that the activity doesn't feel like it is very culturally responsive. I am surprised how well the kids are willing to engage with it, because it seems like it could be better in that area. And even the graphics that are used, how it's visually presented, I'm not real happy with it at a very simple level. But I also have a question, and Annalie kind of touches on this a little bit in the chat. A lot of the kids we're targeting who are underrepresented in computer science have been told they're not smart enough. They're not part of the people who do computer science. They've heard that messaging. And I wonder in some ways if this activity reinforces that in some ways. I'm a little concerned about that. I don't know how those of you who work more closely with those audiences, do you have a concern about how we're really challenging them and giving them a pretty difficult problem that I can't make sense of? I stumbled all over trying to present that at the opening. Is that a good place to start with young people? I'm not sure about that.
Well, and Andrew asked, do you have any thoughts on how to improve it with what you were talking about earlier, like the visuals? Do you have any thoughts on how to improve it to make it better and more culturally sensitive or relevant?
So with visuals, I mean the actual activity, they're using animals, if I'm understanding correctly. But something that someone in our group does, that's the director of our curriculum, that I think is really nice, is like she'll draw or make graphics, cartoons that look like the girls that we work with, so they can see themselves. And we're from an organization that's called the Girls STEM Institute. So even something as simple like the girl had on the shirt, that's a shirt that said Girls STEM Institute. And the cartoons and the images that we use are either like, real photographs from previous students that we worked with, but they look like the girls. And so maybe using that into the computational activity, like we have to come up with a computational tool that we will then assess their computational thinking skills before and after programming. So if you have the opportunity to develop your curriculum, then you can incorporate cultural representations, or look for those kinds of things with the population that you're working with.
One of the simple things I think we could do to make it more appropriate for different audiences is the second list of items. A lot of those are food items, and they're really random food items. You could pick food items that would be familiar with the students. So, you could have things that they would relate to. I think that would make it, even just that simple change of, instead of having a pineapple, maybe have a tamale for these students. It's pretty simple, easy to draw type of food, but something that the students would relate to more than what they have on the list. The other option is, if it is just really random, maybe that's in some ways also appropriate, but I would rather have it be more familiar.
Yeah, I agree. And that's a good point. That reminds me, a lot of like you can also pick things that are relevant to youth now. So I don't know if you're familiar, but one popular type of chip is Takis.
Yeah.
And just things that are relevant to where they can see themselves or relate to, versus like carrots or just random things.
All right, thank you for sharing. And I think we are just about done, so we need to move on. So do you want to put the slides back up, Sandra? And
Yeah.
we will go ahead and finish up here. So positive youth development is an important component in your thinking about computer science and computational thinking. And we want you to be more than just developing knowledge. We also want to use these activities to help youth develop their full potential as thinkers, problem solvers, and innovators. And so Sandra will close us out.
So the title for this workshop is You're a Computational Thinker, and we try to highlight some of the ways that you're using computational thinking in as you're approaching problems in everyday life. The idea of breaking it down, trying to make it into a more manageable problem, or looking for patterns. Is this like a challenge that I faced before? Those are ways we're using computational thinking in our life, and those are the sort of strategies, the self-regulation strategies that are very important for students to have too. So this approach of developing a computational thinker from Barefoot Computing, it is thinking about what are the concepts about computer science that I want students to understand the way logic is used in programming, the strategies of computational thinking that we just talked about, those are concepts that we want students to understand. And then there are also approaches to how do you deal with a problem, perseverance, being creative, tinkering with a solution, making small changes till you've got something that works. So when we're thinking about computational thinking and we're thinking about the young people we work with as a whole person, it's not just giving them the content about what is computer science and how do you program a computer, how do you use Scratch to write a program. Those are important outcomes, but also thinking about these outcomes related to how they see themselves and the strategies that they can use that are going to be helpful in terms of self-regulation and problem solving beyond just the context of computer science are also important outcomes to think in mind when we're working with young people and thinking about how are we going to help them see these strategies and how they relate to computer science. I think the activity here does a good job of that. And then how do we help them see how those strategies can be useful in the rest of their life as well. Creating a list of steps that they're going to get to solve a problem is going to be helpful if they're working on putting together a longer paper. Maybe they need to break that down into, I'm going to do some brainstorming and then I'm going to do a first draft and I'm going to have the first draft done by Thursday so that I can have a finished draft by Monday. Just being able to think through that process is going to be helpful to them, if not now, soon in their future as they move into high school. So we want to think about how we can apply what we've learned about computational thinking in our own lives and how we can help our students develop and see themselves in this way. So, I think that the questions I had thought about are pretty obvious. Why do you think learning computational thinking is important for young people? How will it help prepare them for their future? Those are pretty generic questions, but I'd love to have you share some ideas about how this is important specifically for the youth that you work with, because I think that was a really much more useful discussion for me to hear Annalie and Amadi talk about what the students that they work with really need. So in the chat, can you share how this is good, how these skills are really important for the youth that you're working with and how it's going to help prepare them for their future? Or if you'd rather just talk, that's okay too. But is this helpful for the students that you work with? Are you trying to develop computational thinking or teach computer science because it's helpful for their future? One of the things that's important for me is almost every job that the young people are going to have is going to require them to have some computer science skills to understand how to use computers as a tool, to understand how computers work, even if they're not actually in a computer science related field. But if they are selling cars, they're going to be still using these thinking practices. So helping them understand the career connection and how this can help them in the future, I think is beneficial. And if they do decide to pursue a computer science related career, we know those are good paying jobs that they pay usually above average in whatever community you're in. So even if they are coming out of high school with a good background in computer science, they can they can find a much better job than if they don't have those skills. And if they decide to continue on to college in a 2-year or 4-year degree program, it's going to set them up to be very successful moving forward. These are the goals that we set out with at the beginning of the session. We wanted to make sure you had an understanding of what the computational thinking practices are, and hopefully build your confidence in being able to facilitate this type of experience and have some strategies you can use. And we also wanted you to be able to leave with an activity that you can put into practice in your program right away. So again, I put that link to the video earlier in the chat, or you can email us after this session if you have any more questions. Sometimes being able to see the activity is helpful. And then you can download it from code.org, and you can see other resources that code.org has similar to this that you can use with the youth in your program. We picked it specifically because it teaches computer science, but you don't have to have computers for all your learners in order to use the activity, because sometimes we know that's a barrier for programs, particularly if you're just getting started. You may not have computers for all the students. So having some unplugged activities, or even just having some variety in your programming, it helps to have an unplugged activity. I also put a link in the chat for our survey. We would really appreciate your feedback on whether the content we shared in this session was helpful for you. If there's other areas you'd like us to explore, questions that would help your practice, your feedback really helps us know what is useful and whether this sort of introductory workshop is what you need, or if you want something else. So please do take a minute to complete the survey and give us some feedback. We do have some other professional development opportunities coming up. Our Click to Engineering has a webinar a webinar coming up soon on family engineering, family focused engineering, which I know there's, for a lot of programs, there's quite a bit of overlap between computer science and engineering and what you're offering in your programming. So we wanted to let you know about that, as well as we have a community of practice going on Click to Computer Science or Click to Engineering right now. And we're going to be offering some ACRES training in October, I believe, very soon. So all of those are opportunities that can continue this learning and give you more resources that you can use in your programming. So thank you so much for joining us. And there's a link to the Click to Engineering site where you can look for some more opportunities as well.